Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
As we speed towards the 2016 presidential election, the process for nomination becomes less and less transparent.
The media has created the perception that the voters will decide the nomination, and that's the conflict here.
What you're telling me is it's not a democratic society, and your votes don't necessarily matter because it's a democratic representation, correct?
No, that's not what I'm trying to tell you. What I'm trying to say is that we're just one of the political parties. There's many political parties, but political parties choose their nominee, not the general public.
And I'm asking you, it's more than a process question. It's an integrity of the election question, and everybody's asking me this question, so I'm giving you an opportunity to explain it.
Sean, the only people asking this question are the hardcore Donald Trump supporters.
Why do you do this every single time No, you got to stop. Every time I have you on the air.
Join Infowars this Tuesday, April 26th, starting at 7 p.m. as we cover the primaries in the Northeast.
Joining me now is a documentary filmmaker from the UK as well as a firefighter. They're very concerned about something that happened in America 15 years ago. You know, we've had the missing 28 pages. Many people ask, how did we go this long without even knowing there was a missing 28 pages? Well, there were a lot of us who were talking about it, a small core of people who were pushing that issue. Now it has gone to national attention thanks to Donald Trump focusing on it. What is going to be the breakthrough to get us to look at what happened with the third building on 9/11, Building 7, World Trade Center Building 7? Joining us now are Brian Maxwell, an Edinburgh firefighter with 15 years experience with the Scottish Fire and Rescue. He resigned over his treatment by senior officers following a brief 3-minute appearance in a documentary by the filmmaker. Also joining us, Tony Rooke, and his film Incontrovertible. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi.
Tell us a little bit about why you, let's start with Brian. Brian, why as a Scottish firefighter would you put your job on the line and essentially lose your job over something that happened in America 15 years ago?
I think we've got a common bond across the pond here between the UK and the United States, and they both went to war for the same reasons they gave us all. Basically, it's a conscience-driven decision that I made to pursue this issue.
Yes, yes. And tell us what about the official story, either one of you can answer this. What about the official story that they're telling us is something that concerns you?
I mean, where do you want to start? I mean, it concerns me that it took over 400 days for the initial investigation to get going. I mean, when my father was a detective, I think if you went into a police station and said a relative of yours had been murdered, and they said, well, we're going to take 400 days before we start investigating this thing, that would bother me to begin with.
Yes.
The fact that, and I don't mean any disrespect to the American people here, David, but your government have a previous history of planning to kill their own people. And I think when you look at 9/11 in any kind of detail, the whole scenario doesn't smell very nice. And when you start studying Building 7, which is what I started to do around about 2005, 2006, it began to concern me very, very much. And as the years went by, people like Brian, who we're talking with tonight, obviously became very concerned as well. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many things that are extremely troubling about the whole story.
Brian, tell us what the official story is in terms of why Building 7 collapsed, because I think many people don't realize that we had 2 planes and 3 buildings that collapsed that day. Tell us what they're telling us officially as to why it collapsed.
Yeah, I mean, they're telling us officially that this building came down due to normal office-type fires. And even that isn't well publicised. What's the reason for that? Why haven't they promoted and publicised that as a safety issue? We're not getting it. We're just not getting it.
Yeah,
I think that's why Tony's made the documentary that he's made, because that is one of the issues in the documentary.
And I think that's the key issue here, is that if they're telling us that normal office fires caused this steel frame building to fall down. The only one in history that's ever happened. If that were true, then we need to ask what is being done to eliminate this risk in the future. Where are the studies that we need to see about this to help us to engineer buildings differently, to fight fires differently?
Yeah, I mean, these are the questions that remain unanswered at the moment. So we need to push this issue, which is I have been doing up until I left the fire service, without much success, unfortunately. The promotion of the actual documentary and the pushing of the issues, it didn't get the kind of galvanizing effect upon firefighters that I kind of, or maybe I was naive in believing that it, there would be some kind of response, positive response in this regard. That just didn't happen, unfortunately.
Now, you appeared for just 3 minutes in this documentary. Your supervisors, your senior supervisors, disciplined you for, quote, operating outside the parameters of your employer's code of conduct. Wouldn't you think that the senior firefighting officials would be concerned if there was a new vulnerability for skyscrapers that had been uncovered with the collapse of Building 7 from normal fires? Wouldn't you think they would want to know about that?
Yeah, it's a good point. During the investigation, they weren't interested in the content of the DVD. They weren't interested in the message. They were only interested in looking at my misdemeanors. And they were correct. They did what they had to do. I was operating out with the parameters of the code of conduct unwittingly at the time. And I was quite rightly disciplined, but they've completely not paid any regard or addressed the safety issue, which is something that needs to be promoted and pushed.
Tony, in the press release that you sent me, pointed to a February 2016 YouGov poll, which said that when 49% of those people who saw the collapse of Building 7 doubted the official report, 27% had doubts. So it's only a quarter of the people who looked at that and said, yeah, I could believe that it could all just collapse on its own weight like that. But 75% of the people did not believe it. When I look at this, and when I look at what's happening with the secret, the classified 28 pages that were redacted, I'm reminded that the truth can lie hidden for a very long time until a determined group of people finally expose it. And this happened really, I believe, because Donald Trump raised the issue, because we'd had members who sat on the 9/11 Commission, senior senators who were the chair of the Select Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator Bob Graham, who'd been a former governor of Florida as well, had been working on this, had been trying to bring this to the attention of the public since this happened. Said the public needs to see these 28 pages so they understand some of the people that were complicit in this, and that's being hidden by our government. And yet he could not break through. This is a guy who was head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So I know that Brian, the firefighter, gets a lot of pushback from his fire department when he starts to talk about 9/11, because everybody wants to just pull back and say, hey, that's the official story. We're not going to look at it. But I think there's an opening here now that people have opened their mind, realize that something has been hidden for a very long time. Perhaps they'll be willing to look at some of the implications of Building 7.
Yeah, I think so, David. I mean, I think I said to you in a communication before we did the interview that I feel that America is so big and so wonderfully patriotic. I'm tempted to use the word idiotically patriotic, and we are in England as well. We just had the Queen's birthday the other day. She's 90 years old, and the whole country's up in joyous arms about the fact the Queen is 90. But I think that the zeitgeist is changing. I've not obviously seen the 28 redacted pages, unless it says that we did it. I'm not particularly interested in them, to be brutally honest. So I think, absolutely. I mean, there is a sea change happening, and what I'm concerned about, I've looked into since making the film Incontrovertible, and since Brian and I got together. Is there something we can actually sort of pin down? And I'm not sure there is, but in England, for American fire services, sorry, is there something we can pin down with American fire services where you can go on strike or industrial action? I don't know what you call it in America. We call it going on strike in England.
Yeah,
where
we do.
they down tools and they stop working. I'm not sure that would happen in England either, but it does happen here quite a lot.
Gentlemen, when we look at this, the parallels, I think, in terms of how we unfold this truth, you just said in the last segment, Tony, that you don't really care what's in the secret 28 pages unless they say, sorry, we did it. That's true. There's so many different questions. There's questions from engineers. There's questions from pilots who have questions about the official story. Let's focus on what's going on with Building 7 and the implications for firefighters if a minor fire can drop this building. Now, in your documentary, you said this would change everything, that the way the firefighters would fight fires, according to one of the firefighters there. He says, we go into the building, we set up a base right below the floor that's on fire, and we work from there. Is it going to collapse on us suddenly in 7 seconds and free fall?
Well, I mean, Brian could probably answer this question better than I. I'm not a firefighter, David, but Adrian Mallet, who's one of the firefighters we interviewed in the film, does state that, you know, categorically. That's what you do. You go into the floor below the fire, you set up a bridgehead, you send up breathing apparatus teams, water jets, etc., etc. And we have been told by NIST, you know, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that, you know, these composite beams, you know, hooked up to joining fixtures, column 79 famously, are extremely susceptible to thermal expansion, and they can, you know, unseat themselves, they can fall apart, and then they create this domino effect where the whole thing can come down. And so let's go with the official story. I mean, if that's the case, then any firefighter in their right mind wouldn't go into a high-rise building and fight a high-rise fire, because it could fall down on their head very, very quickly.
Exactly.
I mean, you know.
Exactly. And the question is, you know, when we look at the missing 28 pages and the allegations that this shows close ties to the Saudi government and the efforts to allow 9/11 families to then sue the Saudi government for compensation, where are the lawsuits for this building? I mean, is this a building that was not designed up to standards? Is it unique? Because we haven't seen any other steel frame buildings that have collapsed. So what is it about this building that is so unique, if we're going to go with the official story? And why haven't we seen any lawsuits from 9/11 families? Why hasn't anybody sued them for malpractice? Because they were supposed to design these buildings to be hit by airplanes, yet this one collapsed even when it wasn't hit by an airplane.
I completely agree with you. I'm assuming that's a rhetorical question. I mean,
yeah.
I was actually approached when we were doing Incontrovertible and the earlier stages of it, and who I was going to interview in the US, by a chap whose name shall remain nameless at the moment, whose father did the fireproofing of World Trade Center 7. He was disgusted that his father, who's now deceased, was disgusted that the building had fallen down because apparently the fireproofing wasn't good enough. Obviously, it fell down because of thermal expansion, and wanted to talk to me, and we've yet to get together, but I believe him to be genuine. Look at the comments in the film Incontrovertible from Professor Thomas in the University of Victoria at Melbourne, and what he has to say about the theory that NIST has come forward with. It's not very credible, to say the least, David.
Yeah. What we've seen is basically NIST coming out and saying, sorry, it caught fire and just fell down. Well, where are the investigations? As you point out in your documentary, you point out if this was an airplane where this had happened, you would have had the entire fleet of airplanes similar in design grounded until they had identified precisely how that had failed. We don't see that happening here even 15 years later. It's absolutely amazing.
I know, and I mean, I'm not a firefighter. Brian is, and I can understand why Brian jacked his job in. What we're trying to do in the UK at the moment is because we're obviously a lot smaller country, and the firefighting service over here are a little bit more. I don't think it's militant. I think legally we're allowed to do it a bit more. I've tried to research what firefighters are allowed to do in the US, and it varies state by state. So it would seem. Can they go on strike for this? Can they go on strike for that? In England, firefighters are actually quite militant in their own way, pensions and pay and condition, all this kind of stuff. But if we can draw it to their attention that they are in grave danger of having a building fall down on top of them while they're fighting a fire, then hopefully they might be able to do something to bring it to the attention of the hierarchy and ultimately government, which maybe they can't do in the US. I don't know.
That's true. Well, we always hear everybody talking about honoring the brave firefighters and policemen who gave their lives. Why don't we honor them by demanding an investigation to see what happened with this, to make sure that it isn't going to happen again? And quite frankly, that investigation may show that the way that you keep this from happening again is not a engineering solution, but perhaps a political solution, I think, is what lies at the bottom of this. But you interviewed Rudy Dent, somebody that we've also spoken to. Leanne McAdoo had an interesting interview with him in Times Square, somebody who was there when Building 7 collapsed. He said he and other firefighters winced when there was an explosion, just as you would react to that noise. He said that he was absolutely amazed at what happened, but he didn't speak out right away because he was in shock, essentially, from what had happened to his fellow firefighters. And then essentially he was also, for some time, he was concerned about his job. And Brian, I have to say to you, I really appreciate the integrity and the determination that you have to go to the wire with this, to stand up and say, I'm not going to remain silent about something that I see as something that is a concern. I really appreciate you doing that.
Thanks, David. When I wakened up to the reality of this event, it was very late in the day. It was 2010, and when I found out all the information that had been withheld from us on the mainstream media, I was in deep shock for a few weeks. It shook my foundations, and this is to me, this is a really serious issue. And it's not something I'm going to step back from ever until we get a satisfactory conclusion to this.
And let's talk about some of the things that you're trying to do there in the UK. Now, besides the documentary Incontrovertible, you also have a petition that you're putting up. If you get 100,000 signatures, it will be discussed in Parliament. This is a petition to Theresa May demanding an independent investigation into the deaths of 67 British citizens on 9/11. And of course, you're also making available an 11 or 12-minute clip of your film, Incontrovertible. You've got a message to UK firefighters saying, were you aware that any steel-framed building is now susceptible to sudden and total collapse? I think that's a very important way to approach this, to go to the firefighters and to get them to be concerned about this and look at this and say, is this truly a concern? Because, when I look at this, Brian, and I have to say that the people in the establishment on both sides, perhaps they don't believe the official story, or they would do an investigation, or are they that callous with firefighters' lives?
I think, in all honesty, at the moment, I think firefighters, police, military, we're all expendable, we're all replaceable, and that's the way they view us. There's no doubt about it. And certainly on the day of 9/11, I think that 343 souls that lost their lives initially in the two towers that collapsed. They weren't expecting anything to happen other than to be in those buildings fighting fires. They didn't expect those buildings to collapse.
We got less than 1 minute. Tony, I want to end with you. Tell us how people can proceed forward. Tell us a little bit about your film or what you would like them to do. Sign the petition, do whatever. Give us some information about that.
Yeah, I mean, for UK citizens, David, I'm not sure it applies to American citizens. If they can just go to Incontrovertible, Incontrovertible, Tony Rooke, they'll find the website. There is a petition on there whereby they can sign the petition for safer buildings for firefighters.
Well, never underestimate the power of persistence. We now see people openly questioning what they've been told about 9/11 with the 28 pages, and I think that's the real key. Thank you. We're out of time. Sorry, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us, Tony Rooke and Brian Maxwell. And you can see that film, Incontrovertible, and you can see it at incontrovertible911evidence.co.uk. Thank you, gentlemen.
A lot of people ask me, what is the most important area of Infowars that runs the whole operation that is having such a big effect against the globalists? And I've said it over and over again, it is you, the listeners and the viewers, that send us the intel, the news tips, that support the broadcast, that spread the word. You are 90% of the operation or more. You don't stand beside us, you stand at the heart of Infowars. When I talk about the people at Infowars, from customer service, the shipping department, being just as important as our anchors, our researchers, our investigative journalists, and myself, it's absolutely true. Without this team that we've built over the last 20 plus years, we wouldn't be able to do any of what we've been doing. And that's what's so exciting, because we finally built up to a point where we now have the launch pad. Introducing AutoShip for InfoWarsLife.com, a new way to save time and money when you stock up on InfoWarsStore.com products. Again, ladies and gentlemen, when products are sold out, you're unable to get them, sometimes for months, but we hold back the products for people that have already signed up for AutoShip. When you choose AutoShip before checkout on your order at InfoWarsStore.com, we'll give you 10% off and give you guaranteed delivery of out-of-stock products that are on your AutoShip list. Plus, we're giving you free shipping on all orders above $50. Listeners have been requesting this for years because it's so easy to forget to reorder the products when you need them each month. Now it's finally here. AutoShip at InfoWarsStore.com and InfoWarsLife.com. It's easy. Go to InfoWarsStore.com, select your favorite product, click on the AutoShip, and choose how often you want us to send you another order. As you know, I coined the term 360 win, and with the new AutoShip feature at InfoWarsLife.com, it's a sure win. You add to that free shipping on orders of $50, it is a can't lose. Visit InfoWarsStore.com and save 10% off on your next InfoWars Life order by selecting AutoShip at checkout and get free shipping on all orders above $50. That's InfoWarsStore.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139.